Daf Kuf Chav Vav Amud Aleph. We'll begin Daf Kuf Chav Hey Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. We had a machlekes in the Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer said the shutter and a window, bisman shehu kosher v'toli, when it's tied and dangling, then you can insert it into the opening. Chum say no, regardless, benkach or benkach, in any event, you can insert it. So what does it mean, benkach or benkach? Either way, what does that mean? My benkach or benkach, Amir Kahana, bein kosher, bein shena kosher, whether it's tied to the structure or not tied to the structure, as long as it's designated, as long as you have designated the board for this use to be used as a shutter, it doesn't even have to be tied to the structure, even if it's resting on the ground. Since we hold that the Chum say that making a temporary addition to the structure, there's no problem in boina, it's not considered building, as long as you designated that you have intent to use this, you made a mental designation, then it's muter. Rav Yirmiyah asks, why should it be mekel in that way? Why should you say whether it's dangling or whether it's not dangling, whether it's dangling or whether it reaches the ground, but so long as it's tied? It still has to be tied to the structure. Why should we say this? The same machlekes we have over here, we have also regarding a bolt that drags. They used to take a bolt and put it in a hole in the threshold of the door to close the door, to secure the door. As far as inserting that bolt in the door or not, is it mutter or not, we have the following machlekes. If you have the dragging bolt, no lamboy b'mikdash avaloi b'medina. In the Beis HaMikdash it's mutter because ein goyzim shus in the Beis HaMikdash. So this is only an Isser D'Rabbanan. We'll see what the circumstances are momentarily. This is only an Isser D'Rabbanan, so they weren't geyser in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash is mutter. Avaloi b'medina, outside the Beis HaMikdash it's also. V'hamunach, but if it's on the ground, if it's not attached to the structure, kan v'kan also. In both cases it's also. Rabbi Yehuda Omer hamunach b'mikdash. Rabbi Yehuda said if it's munach, even in the mikdash it's muter. V'hanigrar b'medina. But if it's nigrar, it's muter even in the Medina. V'tanya ezel nagar hanigrar shenolam b'mikdash avolay b'medina. So what is the case of the nagar hanigrar that we say noelam b'mikdash, where in the mikdash it's muter and avaloi b'medina, but the Medina is also kol shekosher v'toli v'rosh magir la'aretz. It has to be tied to the structure, even though it comes all the way to the ground. So the way the Tanakama learns over here is, what is the case of the nagar hanigra shenoilam b'mikdash avaloi b'medina, where we say it's mutter in the Beis HaMikdash but not in the Medina? It's kol shev'toloi, it's tied to the structure. The Rosh Magil Aretz, but it's not dangling. It reaches to the ground. I mean, since it's tied to the structure, then there's no problem there's no deraisa dikadin of binyan, since it's tied to the structure. But if it's not dangling, if it comes all the way to the ground, it reaches to the ground, so it looks like he is building. People don't see that it's necessarily attached to the building. So it's a D'Rabbanan. Now, in the Beis HaMikdash, they wouldn't go to the shus, so it's mutter. But in the Medina, it's also. Now, according to this version, according to Tanakama, it still has to be tied. Because if it's not tied, now the way Rashi learns is that if it's not tied, there would be a derisidic isser of binyan. If it's not tied and you're inserting it in the building, there would be a chiv deraisa. So therefore, in the Beis HaMikdash, it would also be us. It's only where it's tied. Then where it's dangling, it's mutter, even in the Medina, because there's no appearance of binyan. If it reaches to the ground, there's an appearance of being baina. So in Beis HaMikdash, they weren't goyzer shvus, it's mutter, in the Medina, it's also. Rabbi Yehuda azev af b'medina mutter. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's tied to the structure, even in the Medina, it's mutter. Even in the outside, it would be mutter. If it's tied to the structure, even if it reaches the ground, it would be mutter even outside the Beis Hamikdash. That's not the case of the Isser. Elazar shemedina also kol she'ina loy kosh v'loy toloi v'shaim to manech v'keren zavis. And Rav Yehuda says, what is the case where we say that in the Medina it's also is where it's not tied at all and it's put into a corner. There in the Medina it's also. There in Medina it's also because over there it looks like binyan. Now it's not really being binyan because once you've designated for use as a shutter or a bolt rather, in this case a nagar and nigrar, then there's no deraisa to get in a binyan. But it looks like binyan, it's also. And the Medina it's mutter. So in order to be mutter in the Medina outside of the Beis Hamikdash, according to Rav Yehuda, it has to be at least tied. It doesn't have to be dangling. It can come all the way to the ground, but it has to be at least tied. V'amar Rav Yeshua bar Ava Mishmei Deula man Tana Nagar and Nigra Rav Elazari. Who is the Tana of Nagar and Nigra? Who is the Tana Kama? The Tana Kama is going according to the shlit of Rav Elazar. So he holds an order in the Medina that it be mutter, therefore it has to be tied and dangling. It can't reach to the ground. Now Rav Yehuda, therefore, must be going according to the shita of the Chachamim. So you see that Rav Yehuda, which is the shita of the Chachamim, holds that to be mutter in the Medina al kolponim, it has to be tied. It doesn't have to be dangling. It can come to the ground, but it has to be al kolponim tied. So l'chera, we should say over here that according to the Chachamim, that it has to be at least tied. Now this is the sheet of Rashi, who learns this way, that learns that in the Tanakama, that there would be an Isser Doraisa of Boinem if it's not tied, and it would be also in the Beis Hamikdash, even in the Beis Hamikdash. Taisus takes issue with this, that why should it be an Isser Doraisa as long as it's designated for use? It should not be an Isser Doraisa. It should be considered to be not being boina over here, because this is the way this item is regularly used. So he has a different approach in the sugya. But this is the approach of Rashi. So Al Kolponim, what do you see over here? You see over here that to be in the Medina, to be mutter in the Medina, Al Kolponim, it has to be tied. It doesn't have to be dangling, but it has to be tied. Amr Lei said, why do I say that according to the Chachamim it does not have to be tied? Because I'm going like the following Tana. Tanya Kanashi skin of Balabais Leis Paisech and Oil Boy. If you took a rod that the person had designated to be Paisech and Oil Boy, to use it to secure a door, to lock on the door. So he used it to be over there. He took this item, he designated this corner to use it and lock, to use it as a lock of the door. So when it's tied to the door, then you can use it. You can lock the door with it. If it's not tied and totally and dangling, so the Tanakama says in order to be a mutter, it has to be tied and it has to be dangling. But Rosh Gamaliel says all you need is the designation, the mental designation, the machshava for it, and then you're allowed to use it. You don't have to even tie it. It's not considered to be baina. It's a temporary addition to the structure. And as long as you're making it and you have machshava for it, then it's mutter. You don't even have to tie it. So you see that Rosh Gamliel holds it doesn't have to be tied. And therefore he says, I maintain that this is the sheet of the Chachamim. And therefore, you don't even have to tie it to the structure. As long as you're making it that it's mukhan for this use, then it's enough. So that's halacha. You need a designation but it doesn't have to be tight. If the you have the lids, the covering for kalim, if they have a handle, then you can move them on Shabbos, you can use them on Shabbos. But it has to be independently a kli. It has to be able to be used for another purpose as well. Otherwise, you can't be metaltal. So the rod, it doesn't have it independently of a kli, and therefore, how can you say that it's, as long as it's mesukan, you can use it and you'll be metaltal it? That's the sheet of Rashi. Rashi's sheet is over here. What mean is when we say v'ushiesh teres kli aleim, means that it can be used aside from being used as a lid. For the kalim, it can be independently used as a kli for other purposes. So it has to have a definition of a kli independently. Taisa says to Kasha, why should that be necessary? As long as it can be used as a lid, it has a function. It's usable. Why should we say that in addition to be used as a lid for the kli, it has to have another purpose? Why should it have to have another purpose? If it be used as a lid for a keli, it has a function, so it shouldn't be muksa. So why is that necessary? Therefore, Taisa says, what we're talking about is something that was not used as a kli. It's not a lid for a kli on its own. It's something, it's a material that could be used but was not used, and therefore, for instance, if you took a board, you have to do a maisa now to use it and to designate it to use, even as a lid for covering. It doesn't have to have a different use. It can be used as a lid for a keli, rather. It can be used as a covering for a keli. It doesn't have to have an alternate use, but it needs a designation for this use. So as long as it's designated for this, you need a maisa to designate it for this use. So therefore, how can we say that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? How can Rav Yochanan say that? Rav Yochanan says, "V'hu sheyesh teres kli aleim," and the rod l'chayra does not have a teres kli. Maybe you'll say that we're talking in a case where the rod does have a kli; it's usable for other purposes, for turning over olives, etc. Maybe it does have a teres kli. Or says, no, me boy Rav Shimon Gamliel teres kli alav. But Rav Shimon Gamliel doesn't need a teres kli. Rav Yochanan said, halach Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel says you don't need a teres kli. If you have the cut branches of the palm tree that were harvested to use for wood, for firewood, etc., and now you want to use them as a bench, as a chair, as a bench, Tzorach L'Kasha. The Tanakama says you have to do a maisa, you have to do a kshira maisa to now designate them for permitted use. Rav Shimon Gamliel ain't Tzorach L'Kasha. But Rav Shimon Gamliel says you don't need a maisa. You have just the mental designation. You have the machshava is enough. So you see, Rav Shimon Gamliel says you don't need a maisa. And over here, Rav Yochanan, how can you say Allah is like Rav Shimon Gamliel? Rav Yochanan says that who sheyesh teres kli aleim, it has to have a teres kli. You can't take something which is not a kli and just with a designation, with a machshava, make it mutter. Moran says Rav Yochanan sphere like he holds them in one way and he argues on him on something else. Meaning he holds that legabe boine, he holds that you don't need, it doesn't even have to be tied. It doesn't even have to be tied, and there's no problem of baina. But he argues with Rav Shimon Gamliel in another manner, another way, and he says that to take a raw material, to take a kona, and that is not a kli, and over there, that would not be mutter. He would argue on the case of the Choriyas Shaldeka. He says by machshava alone, that's not enough. You need a mice to take a muksadik item, something which is not a kli, and now have a designation as a kli. But something which is not muksa, and therefore has a designation as a kli, to now insert it as a shutter, or to use it as a bolt in the door, there he holds that, like Rav Shimon Gamliel, that it's mutter.